Hi, Bighara here, back again with another installment of my video blog. This is part 2 of the Undead series, and I'm just going to pick it up today with, wow, I'm getting a lot of reflection off these. Here, I'm just going to put these down. I'm going to pick it up here with ghouls, which I had mentioned when I was talking about zombies and zombie apocalypse and so forth and so on, and how I felt like that ravenous brains kind of a zombie role in gaming could be easily filled by the ghoul. I like ghouls. I think ghouls are a good low-level scary undead, a little bit more frightening than just a skeleton or a zombie when you're talking about D&D and that sort of thing. They have that special paralysis ability, which gives them a little twist. It's not a save or die situation, but it is more than just simply attacking and doing damage. I tend to run them not as intelligent, but cunning, like a predator. They're driven by their hunger. They're not calculating and really, really smart, but they're not just automatons. They're more independent than, say, a skeleton or something like that. At least that's how I tend to run them. I think that can make them very fun to do in terms of making them kind of scary because they're almost bestial. The paralysis part is scary in a fight because even if they don't do any significant damage, you fail a saving throw and you're out of the game. Which brings me to the other point about them, which I really like, is if you have a pack of ghouls or something that attacks a party, and they're in a combat, the PCs tend to operate on a very tactical level, at least in my experience they do. And that is the idea that if they down a foe, so let's say your fighter knocks down one of the ghouls, and he's gotten his foe out of the fight, he's going to move on to the next one, and he's going to move on and maybe possibly help another player character, protect the mage behind him or something like that. And that's just the logical way to progress through the fight to kind of to win, which is fine, and that makes perfect sense. But with a ghoul, or a creature like a ghoul, that's ravenous and not necessarily really intelligent, that's not necessarily how they're going to operate. And that sounds like a disadvantage. In a way it is, but if you think about this from a scary perspective, let's say you have your fighter who's got, 10, 15 hit points. He's a low-level fighter, but he's not a total wimp. And he gets attacked by a ghoul, and the ghoul manages to hit. And the ghoul does maybe just a couple points of damage, like 2 or something like that with a claw. But paralysis effect, and the fighter fails a saving throw. Again, I'm using D&D-isms because this is what I typically run and play. But whatever the mechanics you use, the idea is the same. Now the fighter's paralyzed. Now here comes the fun part. The ghoul wouldn't necessarily, in my opinion, move on to the next character and try and down the whole party and move in some sort of logical order. Driven by its hunger, the ghoul would settle down for a snack. Now, here's the next part of that. In my games, we typically play that if you have a foe that's helpless or something like that, you can spend a round and you can essentially coup de grace or finishing move them and finish them off. In mundane terms, this would be like cutting someone's throat or something like that, and just making sure they're dead, not just bleeding out or unconscious or whatever it is. And sometimes we have it where the monsters do that, where they say, okay, like an orc or something might say, all right, I've knocked this guy down, now I'm going to cave his head in and make sure he's really dead. And they'll do that to player characters on occasion. But in the case of the ghoul, it doesn't necessarily have to be that case. So imagine that instead of just neatly dispatching his foe and moving on, the ghoul, assuming he's not immediately threatened by another character, settles down for a snack and rips off the fighter's hand and starts chewing on that. Now you could assign some arbitrary amount of damage, like say maybe that does d6 damage or something like that, but it has the in-game effect of the fighter he's basically crippled, he's maimed, all of a sudden something like that. And you can apply all these sort of fun in-game effects for that. Now, in D&D you have hit points, and you say, well, there's not really a rule for that. Well, I don't think there has to be a rule for that. I mean, the fact is, you can't just cast a Cure Light Wounds and restore a severed hand. The idea is that would require a much more powerful spell. And I think that it's fair to say that if somebody made a deliberate attempt to rip off, essentially the equivalent of ripping off a chicken wing and having at it, even if it doesn't kill the metaphorical chicken, the wing's still gone. You could have a whole fun thing where the ghoul then takes off with his snack, and he's got, whatever, the forearm of the hand, and he goes running because he figures he's going to, live to eat another day, or unlife, or whatever it is. So, you can have a lot of fun with that kind of thing. And like I said, the paralysis is a lot of fun too. So that's ghouls. Alright, next I want to talk about wights. Wights are one of my favorites. I also like wights a lot. Wights are sort of that sweet spot with ghouls, I think, where you're on the cusp of moving into the higher level, more powerful undead, but you haven't quite got to that really super powerful level. The wights have the level drain, which is very spooky, but they're not incorporeal, they're not spell casting or all these sorts of things. Of course, one of the most famous examples would be the Tolkien Barrow wights. The idea behind the wights is, in most of the fluff, is that you have a dead body that has become essentially possessed by an evil spirit. And so it's not a question of the animating spirit isn't the one that had been the mortal spirit in the body when it was alive. It's something else. It's sort of something alien that's come in. Whether it's a ghost or a demon or whatever, you can kind of have at it. So anyway, I find them a lot of fun because they're not so powerful that they'll just completely wipe out a party, but they will really frighten a party unless it's of pretty high level, or at least well beyond the low levels, because even they're difficult to turn, and we'll talk about turning undead at the end, because I kind of skipped over that before, and I don't want to talk about it with each individual undead. They're more difficult to turn than things like zombies and skeletons, and they are with that special ability. And also, in many cases, normal weapons won't hurt them. That's the other neat thing about them. You have to have silver, or you have to have like a +1 weapon to hurt them. So here you have this thing with immunities, a special attack, and things like that. So wights are great fun. And to use wights, this is also one where you're going to get away from the idea of a big pack of them, probably. It's probably just going to be one or a few. But they're going to be in like remote crypts and things like that. They might even be a sort of a guardian for a tomb, though it would be more of a case of where someone who possibly bound some spirit to the tomb. It wouldn't be, again, a case of the actual deceased person's spirit, because that's not exactly how wights are usually depicted. But what I like to do with the wights is typically I like to get them in quick. I like to get them into the thick of things as fast as I can, because the fact is, if they can't get within melee range, they're not going to be using their level draining attack, and that's what really terrifies and that's what really scares the PCs. If they start off way over here and they're charging up, the PCs have a couple rounds to try turning undead, shooting some magic arrows at them, lighting them on fire, and they're not so powerful that they can withstand too many rounds of that attrition before closing to melee. And because all their attacks tend to be melee attacks, having them pop out of a sarcophagus or something like that is or come sneaking up behind them in the dark, that sort of thing is the best way I find to utilize them in the game. And I broke one of my rules. I used the word utilize. Utilize is a useless word. Anyway, end of tangent. And that's wights. Okay, I think we're coming up on about 10 minutes here. I had another one I want to talk about before I moved on to some other ones, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to them this episode. We may have to go 3 parts on this one. I want to talk about mummies. Mummies are sort of a special case because unlike zombies and skeletons, they're more powerful, they have special abilities and things like that. But again, they're not the super powerful, like intelligent undead either. And I don't know, some people run them where some mummies are intelligent and some aren't. I'm kind of on the fence about that. I think it depends on what makes the most sense. I think you can have an intelligent mummy, like a mummy lord, but in a lot of the depictions, they're not necessarily. Of course, you can argue in ancient Egypt they pulled the brain out through your nose, so what brain do you have to use? But mummies are fun. Mummies can be very scary. The mummy rot, they're strong, they do a lot of damage, things like that. Another interesting idea that I haven't really seen explored is the idea of mummies' curses, where perhaps just finding and defeating the mummy may just be the beginning. Maybe some sort of weird geas or curse falls on the party. I think that could be kind of interesting to run. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, don't feel bound to using mummies just in like an Egyptian desert motif, because there's nothing to say you can't have a fantasy setting or culture where there's where they have mummification as part of their rites, even if they don't have pyramids and everything else. Also throw out the idea of natural mummies, things like the bog mummies, which are an interesting thing, where this can happen under natural circumstances, where a dead body in a peat bog undergoes essentially sort of a natural mummification process. And this can be fun because this isn't where a lot of times players are expecting a mummy. They're out in the desert, they see a pyramid, they're expecting a mummy. They're walking through a peat bog, and essentially the equivalent of the Scottish Highlands, they're probably not expecting a mummy. So, you can have a little bit of fun with that. I think we're going to wrap this one up with mummies, and next time I'm going to talk about ghosts and incorporeal undead, and I also wanted to talk a little bit about vampires and lichs, and with a little luck we'll wrap up with some discussion of turning of the undead. So this will be a 3-parter. Anyway, thanks for listening. That's all for now. Talk to you later.